The night I found out my aunt had left me everything. I was sitting in a hospital waiting room, still wearing my scrubs from a 12-hour shift, drinking cold vending machine coffee, and wondering if I had enough in my checking account to cover rent. That was 3 years ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like someone else's life entirely. Let me start from the beginning. My Aunt Ruth was my father's older sister, and she was the kind of woman who made a room feel different just by walking into it. Not because she was loud or flashy, she was actually the opposite. She drove a 10-year-old Subaru, wore the same pearl earrings every single day, and kept a vegetable garden in the backyard of her house in Asheville, North Carolina, that she tended herself every morning before 6 a.m. She had built her money quietly. Over 40 years, through commercial real estate and a handful of investments she made in the early 90s when nobody was paying attention. By the time she turned 72, she was worth somewhere around $9 million. Nobody in the family talked about it openly, but everybody knew. I knew because she told me herself one afternoon when I was 23 and we were shelling butter beans on her porch. And she said, completely unprompted, "I want you to understand what I've built, Wren, because someday it's going to matter." I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded and kept shelling. She never said it again. I filed it away somewhere in the back of my mind and mostly forgot about it, because at 23, $9 million felt about as real to me as a spaceship. I was a nursing student working part-time at a diner. I had other things to think about. My brother, on the other hand, had been thinking about Aunt Ruth's money for a very long time. His name is Grant. He's 6 years older than me and spent most of his adult life making very confident decisions that never quite worked out the way he planned. A restaurant that closed after 14 months. A consulting firm that seemed to mostly consist of him taking long lunches and sending emails. A real estate venture in Myrtle Beach that ended in a lawsuit. Through all of it, my parents quietly bailed him out. Not so quietly, actually. My mother had a gift for making her sacrifices known. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering, there was some version of, "We've done so much for your brother," which was true. They had. What I didn't understand for a long time was that everything my parents gave to Grant was money they borrowed from Aunt Ruth. Loans, she gave them, quietly, without interest, because she believed in keeping family together. My parents told Grant about these loans. They never told me. I found that out later, too. I was the one who drove Aunt Ruth to her chemotherapy appointments. Not because anyone asked me to. I was 28 by then, working as a registered nurse at a hospital 40 minutes from her house, and I just started doing it. The first time, I found out she had cancer the way I found out most things about Aunt Ruth. She mentioned it casually, as if it were a minor inconvenience. She called me on a Tuesday evening and said, "I started chemo last week. The appointments are on Thursdays. I've been taking a cab, but it's expensive and the drivers don't know where to park." I told her I'd pick her up that Thursday. That was 2.5 years before she died. We got into a rhythm. I'd pick her up at 7:30, stop at the drive-thru for her large sweet tea with no ice because that's what she wanted, sit with her through the infusion, and then take her home and make sure she ate something before I left. Some days she was talkative. Some days she slept in the chair, and I just sat nearby and charted notes on my laptop or read. She never made a big deal of it, neither did I. My brother visited 3 times in those 2.5 years. My parents came more often, but they had a way of making the visits feel like obligations. A certain tightness around their mouths. A habit of checking their phones, conversations that drifted toward what the doctors were saying about timelines. Aunt Ruth noticed everything. She just didn't say much about it. The last time I saw her, she was having a good day. She was sitting up in bed and she wanted to talk about the garden. Which tomatoes had done well that season. Which ones she'd probably pull. She held my hand when I was leaving and said, "You have always been exactly who you are, Wren. That's rarer than you think." She died 11 days later, on a Wednesday morning in October, while I was at work. The lawyer's office was in downtown Asheville, on the 3rd floor of a building with old wood floors and tall windows. There were 5 of us in the room, Me, my brother, my parents, and a man named Mr. Calloway who had been Aunt Ruth's attorney for over 20 years. My brother sat with his ankle crossed over his knee, already looking like he was about to sign something. My mother had worn a blazer. My father kept his hands folded on the table. I had come straight from a closing shift, and I was tired in a way that felt cellular. Mr. Bamey, Calloway opened a folder and explained, without a great deal of preamble, that Aunt Ruth had revised her will approximately 14 months earlier. The estate, including the house, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, and liquid assets totaling approximately $9.2 million, had been left in its entirety to me. There was a silence that lasted maybe 4 seconds. My brother said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Billing." Calloway repeated it. My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. My father put one hand flat on the table. I sat very still because I genuinely did not know what to do with my face. Grant turned to me and said, "Did you know about this?" I told him I didn't. He said he found that very hard to believe. Mr. Calloway continued. There were conditions attached to the inheritance. Not punitive ones, just practical. The house had to remain in the family or be donated to a land trust. A portion of the liquid assets was designated for a scholarship fund in Aunt Ruth's name at the community college she'd attended. And there was a letter, addressed to me. Mr. Calloway slid it across the table. I put it in my bag without opening it, because I knew if I read it in that room in front of my brother's expression and my mother's blazer and my father's flat hand on the table, I would cry, and I didn't want to do that. My brother asked if the will could be contested. Mr. Bursix, Calloway said he was welcome to consult with an attorney. The drive home was 45 minutes, and I don't remember most of it. I parked in front of my apartment building, a second-floor walk-up in a complex that smelled like other people's cooking and had a laundry room in the basement that always had one broken machine. And I sat in my car and opened the letter. Aunt Ruth's handwriting was small and very neat. She wrote that she had watched me show up, year after year, not for what I might receive but because it was the right thing to do. She wrote that she had spent a long time thinking about who should carry what she had built, and the answer had always been obvious. She wrote that she knew the family would not take this well, and she was sorry for putting me in that position, but she trusted me to handle it. She wrote that the vegetable garden needed the beds turned in early spring, and that I should try the lemon cucumbers next year because they were worth it. That last part is the one that made me cry. I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Then I went upstairs and called my best friend Danny and told her what had happened, and she was quiet for a moment and then said, "Wren, that's $9 million. I know, I said. She asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know yet. My brother called me the next morning at 7:15. He was calm in the way that people are calm when they are working very hard to stay calm. He said he thought we should talk about this like adults. He said Aunt Ruth clearly hadn't been thinking clearly near the end, that the disease and the medication affected people's judgment, that this wasn't what she would have wanted if she had been herself. He said it had to be a mistake. I told him it wasn't a mistake. He said maybe I didn't understand how much our family had struggled, how much our parents had sacrificed, how much he had gone through trying to build something for himself without any real support. I thought about the restaurant bailout, the consulting firm, the Myrtle Beach lawsuit. I didn't say any of that. I said that I understood the will was difficult news, but that Aunt Ruth had made her wishes very clear. There was a pause, and then his voice shifted. Not calm anymore, and he said if I thought I was going to sit on $9 million while our parents struggled in retirement, I had another thing coming. He said he had already talked to a lawyer. He said I should think carefully about what kind of person I wanted to be. I said I was going to go to work now. He hung up. My parents showed up at my apartment that Saturday afternoon without calling first. My mother had brought a dish of her baked, which she set on my counter without being asked. My father sat down at my kitchen table and folded his hands the same way he had in the lawyer's office. They had clearly talked through what they were going to say before they came. My mother said she didn't blame me. She said she was sure this was just as shocking for me as it was for everyone else. She said family was family, and that Aunt Ruth had always been a little unpredictable, and that surely I could see how unfair the situation felt from where they were standing. My father said they weren't asking for all of it, just enough to make things right. Pay back what Aunt Rue had lent them over the years. Make sure Grant had some stability. Make sure they could retire without worrying. He said a few $100,000 would change everything. I asked them why they had never told me about the loans. My mother said that wasn't relevant. I said it felt relevant to me. My father said that I was being difficult. I told them I needed some time to talk to my own attorney before I made any decisions. I said I wasn't refusing anything, I was just being careful. I thought that was reasonable. I thought giving them that, the possibility, the not yet closed door, would be enough to keep things from escalating. I was wrong about that. My brother had hired an attorney, a real one this time, not the kind who helped with restaurant leases, and filed a formal challenge to the will. The grounds were undue influence and diminished capacity. The argument was that I'd spent 2.5 years positioning myself as the primary caregiver to a sick and vulnerable woman, that I had isolated her from the rest of the family, that the change to the will 14 months before her death was the result of my manipulation and not her genuine wishes. I read that in a letter from their attorney and had to read it 3 more times before it felt real. I had driven her to chemotherapy for 2.5 years. I had sat next to her while poison dripped into her veins to try to buy her more time. I had made sure she ate. I had turned her garden beds in the spring because she couldn't kneel anymore and didn't want to ask anyone to do it. I had held her hand when she needed it, and given her space when she needed that instead. And the argument being made, in formal legal language, was that I had done all of that in order to steal from my family. I called my attorney, a woman named Ms. Childless. Hendricks, who came highly recommended and had calm, very direct eyes, and she told me not to panic. She told me will contests of this nature had a low success rate. She told me that the 14 months between the revision and the death was not indicative of a deathbed change. She told me that Aunt Ruth had used Mr. Calloway for over 2 decades and that he had documentation of her mental clarity at the time of the revision, including a letter from her oncologist and a cognitive assessment. She told me one more thing. She said Aunt Ruth had apparently anticipated a challenge, and that Mr. Calloway had materials he had been instructed to share with me if and when a formal contest was filed. I went back to Mr. Calloway's office on a Thursday afternoon after a morning shift. He had a box on his desk, not large, a banker's box with a lid, and he explained that Aunt Ruth had left specific documentation for exactly this circumstance. Inside were copies of the loan agreements, every amount she had given my parents over 23 years, dates and figures signed by my father. The total was $412,000. She had never called them in. She had forgiven them quietly, but she had kept the records. There were also printed emails, between my aunt and her financial advisor, between my aunt and Mr. Calloway, between my aunt and, in a few cases, my parents and my brother. Emails in which my brother had asked her, on 4 separate occasions over the last 6 years of her life, to consider restructuring her estate with him as a primary beneficiary. Emails in which he had suggested she was being taken advantage of by her financial people. Emails in which my mother had forwarded articles about nurses inheriting from elderly patients and the legal implications thereof. My mother had sent my aunt an article about predatory caregivers, about me. Aunt Ruth had never responded to it. She had just saved it. And then there was a handwritten note, 1 page, addressed to Mr. Calloway, dated 2 days before the will was revised. In it, she wrote that she was making this change of her own free will in full clarity and for reasons she had considered for many years. She wrote that she was aware her family would likely challenge it. She wrote that she had saved the documentation of their own conduct because she wanted the record to be clear about who had been calculating and who had simply shown up. I sat in that office for a long time after Mr. Calloway finished walking me through the box. Then I told him to share everything with Ms. Hendricks. The will contest was withdrawn 4 months later. I don't know exactly what Ms. Hendricks said to their attorney. I know the documentation was shared. I know that building a case around my manipulation became considerably more difficult when there was a paper trail of my brother asking our aunt for money, 6 different ways over 6 years. I know that my parents' attorney apparently advised them, in fairly direct terms, that proceeding would be inadvisable. My brother called me the day the withdrawal was filed. He didn't say he was sorry. He said he hoped I was happy. I said I wasn't happy. I said I was tired, and I missed Aunt Ruth, and I wished this had all gone differently. He hung up again. My mother sent me a text 2 weeks later that said she hoped I knew what I had done to this family. I read it. I didn't respond. I have not heard from my father since the day they came with the baked ziti. I kept working at the hospital for another 8 months after the estate settled. Not because I had to, because I needed to. I needed to feel like myself. And I was not sure who I was outside of the rhythms I had built. The shifts, the patience, the particular quality of exhaustion that came from work that mattered. I needed to make sure I was making decisions about the money from somewhere solid, not from the disorientation of sudden change. I talked to a financial advisor. I talked to Miss Hendricks more than once. I sat with it. When I finally did leave the hospital, I moved into Aunt Ruth's house in Asheville. The house needed work, not dramatic work, just the kind of accumulated deferred maintenance that happens when someone spends the last years of their life managing an illness and not a renovation. I hired a contractor who had done work for her before and who shook my hand at our first meeting and said, "Miss Ruth was one of the good ones." That felt like being handed something I hadn't expected to need. I established the scholarship fund she had wanted, the Ruth Elaine Calloway Memorial Scholarship, 1 recipient per year from the community college she had attended for nursing students. I sat on the selection committee for the first year. I read every essay. One of them was from a woman working night shifts at a gas station who wanted to become a pediatric nurse because her youngest had been in the NICU and she had never forgotten the nurses there. I made sure she received the scholarship. I put the rest into a trust structured the way Ms. Hendricks and the financial advisor recommended. Conservative. Long-term. I kept my own account separate for daily life. I planted the lemon cucumbers in the spring, the way Aunt Ruth had told me to. They were, as promised, worth it. People ask me sometimes how I feel about my family, whether I regret the distance, whether I think about reconciling. The honest answer is that I don't feel what I expected to feel. I thought I would feel guilty or angry or sad in a sharp, continuous way. Instead, I feel something quieter, a kind of clarity. My aunt left me $9 million, but that isn't actually what she left me. What she left me was the evidence, documented and organized and placed in a banker's box in her attorney's office, that she had seen me. That the years of early mornings and cold waiting rooms and canceled plans had not gone unnoticed. That someone had been paying attention all along. I have a friend group in Asheville now, people I met through the hospital network and through a community garden 2 blocks from the house. I have a routine that I built from scratch, which is different from the one I had before. I have a vegetable garden that is doing reasonably well in its 2nd year. I have quiet mornings and the sound of the neighborhood waking up outside the windows, and the grandfather clock in the front hall that chimes on the hour, and a life that feels not triumphant, exactly, but solid. My aunt built something quietly over 40 years by showing up and being exactly who she was. I'm trying to do the same. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the money. The money was almost secondary to everything that happened. What I keep coming back to is something simpler. Aunt Ruth kept records. Not because she was suspicious or calculating. She kept records because she was precise about what mattered to her, and she wanted the truth to be legible after she was gone. Every loan she gave my parents, every email my brother sent asking her to rethink her estate, every article my mother forwarded implying I was predatory. She saved all of it, quietly, without ever saying a word about it to anyone. She didn't use it to punish anyone while she was alive. She just made sure that if someone came looking to rewrite the story after she was gone, the actual story would still be there. That's the thing I didn't understand when I was younger. When I would watch people like my brother operate and wonder why it seemed to work. It works until it doesn't. The habits that look like strategy, the angling, the positioning, the careful management of appearances, eventually produce a record too. Just a different kind. And when everything is finally laid out in a room, it becomes very clear very fast who was doing what and why. My brother spent 6 years sending emails to a dying woman asking her to redirect her estate toward him. He framed it as concern. He used words like family and fairness and what she would really want. And I think he genuinely believed that framing, that his version of the story was the real one. That I was the one who had been strategic, who had showed up with an agenda. That's the thing about a certain kind of self-deception. It's not performed for other people, it's performed for yourself. And it's remarkably durable right up until it isn't. Aunt Ruth saw through it. Not because she was cynical, but because she paid attention for a very long time. I think about the person I was during those 2.5 years of Thursday drives. I wasn't thinking about the will. I wasn't thinking about $9 million. I was thinking about whether she'd eaten, whether her port was bothering her, whether she wanted to talk or just sit. I was tired from my shifts, and I showed up anyway because she was family and she needed someone, and I was the one who could do it. That was the whole of it. There was no calculation underneath. And I think that's the part that's hardest to explain to people who didn't see it, that doing the right thing quietly, without an audience, without any expectation that it's being noticed or recorded, is both the least impressive thing in the world and the most important thing you can do. It doesn't feel like building anything. It feels like just getting through the week. But it adds up. It compounds. And a person you become from years of just showing up honestly is not the same person you would have been otherwise. My brother wanted the inheritance without having done any of the things that made my aunt want to give it. That's not how it works. Not because there's some force in the universe handing out scorecards. Just because character is not separable from conduct, and people who have known you for decades can read both. Aunt Ruth built something over 40 years by being exactly who she was, consistently, without performing it for anyone. I'm still working on that, but I know what it looks like now. I watched her do it. And I think that, more than the house, more than the accounts, more than the lemon cucumbers, is the thing she actually left me.